Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Herschel Clay Baker, as I'm sure you could have gathered by standing here and taking part in my headstone long enough. But I'm very used to this spot where I am. I've been here for quite some time. But I was up and around these parts for a long time before I got to where I am now. December the 16th, 1841. The day I was born, a ways from here over in Cumberland County, to Eleazar Clay Baker and Sarah Alexander Baker, my parents, who sadly I would lose very early in life. I was just 5 years old when I lost my father, and then my mother died when I was only 14. It was after then, when my mother passed away, that I would move here to Columbia to live with my uncle, Thomas Alexander, who was a local judge. I did all my schooling here in Columbia, graduated from the male and female high school, after which I would attend Center College over in Danville as part of the graduating class 1862. Now, during my junior year of college, I was called upon to give the graduation address to the outgoing senior class, which would have been class 1861. That was the first time in Center College history that an underclassman had been asked to give the graduating speech to the outgoing senior class. And in my lifetime, I don't believe it ever happened again, and that was a long, long time, because at the time in which I passed away, I was the oldest living alumni of Center College. But we'll talk about that here after a while. After graduating from college, I moved back here to Columbia and began practicing law under my uncle, Judge Alexander, and was admitted to the bar 1863. I continued to practice here locally until 1876. But between that time, I would meet and marry my wife, Dolly. Now, everyone that knew us knew her as Dolly. Even individuals that knew us the entire time we were together didn't know that her actual first name was Dorothy Lyle. She was from Lebanon, Marion County. Now, between 18 and we married in 1867. Now, between 1868 and 1883, Dolly and I would welcome 7 children into our family. 4 daughters, 3 sons: Nanny, Nettie, Mamie, and Sarah, Waller, Tyler, and Herschel. Now, unfortunately, our firstborn, our daughter Nanny, died as an infant. But fortunately, all of our other 6 children lived to grow and be adults. Now, as I said, after admitting to the bar 1863, I practiced law here locally until 1876. It was at that time I was met with the opportunity to practice with a much larger firm. The only thing was that would involve me and my family relocating to Louisville, which we did. But that didn't last very long. It was only 3 short years later, 1879, we moved back here to Columbia for good. Now, outside of the law practice, I had a many iron in the fire, let me just tell you. In several different business ventures, in politics, as well as some other things that I'll get to here in a moment. Now, in politics, fortunately, I was lucky enough to have gained the respect of both Democrats and Republicans alike. I represented Adair County in the state legislature, served as your county attorney for some time, and as judge of the 29th Judicial District for a time of 6 years. In business, much like politics, I did my very best to earn the utmost respect of all my constituents. I was president of the board of the very first organization that brought the first fair here to Columbia. It was 1884. I was also involved in the organization of the Bank of Columbia, and I served as its president for some time. I also helped start the Columbia Spectator, and while helping get it up off the ground, I served a very brief time, I might add, as its editor. Now, I probably, very notably and probably most proudly to myself, served local education. Having the large family that I did, I wanted my children to be able to have the best education possible. Many other families felt that way as well because having large families was a common thing in that time. Now, I served as chairman of the board of trustees for the male and female high school for quite some time. It was during that period we got to a point that I felt the school had served its days, if you will. And it was then that I began to push forward with the negotiations to change the current system into a graded system of education. Now, I had a lot of people that backed me on this and thought that it was a necessary change that needed to be made, but the negotiations did not go as smoothly as you may have think because we had a lot of opposition. There was a lot of people that were set in their ways, felt that the current method worked just fine. They didn't want to change. The discussions over these negotiations got very heated and very bitter on several different occasions, and it took 3 different attempts for a motion to be passed. But finally, on the 3rd try, the vote finally carried. Now, outside of all of the being a practicing attorney, all the different business ventures, the politics, me and Dolly made sure that family was always at center stage. Now, having a large family like we did, it would have been very easy for us to cut corners and make things easier, but that's not how we wanted to do things. One thing I wanted my children to know above all else was that your character and your personality would take you farther in this life than any monetary or material object. Now, church was always a big deal for me and Dolly, both while we were growing up. We wanted that same thing for our children. Here we were members of the Presbyterian Church, very devoted and very active members. I served as an elder for a little while. Dolly, along with the other women of the church, was very, very active. Our children became involved in church at very young ages and continued on up until they were adults. Now, you're probably thinking that my family, me and my wife and our children, had it pretty good. And we did. You'll not hear any pity party coming from yours truly. We dealt with every struggle and every hardship that anyone else had come to their doorstep. But I can say that proudly my family never wanted or needed for anything. However, tragedy would strike our union in 1904. It was the last day of August, a Wednesday afternoon. Dolly and I were on our way back to Columbia from Russell Springs. We were just across the Russell Creek crossing, just past White Oak, when our horse, for whatever reason, became spooked. I lost control of the reins and we were left with no other choice but to jump from the buggy. When we did, thankfully, other than some scrapes and scratches, I was not hurt. Dolly, however, was not so lucky. She suffered severe injuries in her fall. I was able to get her to the closest nearby house. It was the home of a gentleman by the name of Mr. Cy Roy. And Mr. Roy was very gracious. He took us right in, immediately sent back to Columbia for Dr. Grissom and Dr. Grady. Seeing the severity of her injuries, we also sent for our children, the ones that were available and able to make it, and they made it very hastily to their mother's side. Now, in the coming days, Dolly would regain consciousness and was able to communicate with those of us around. We all gathered a great deal of hope that there would be a recovery. But it was a false hope, unfortunately. On the Sunday following the accident, very peacefully in her sleep around 3 or so in the afternoon, my sweet Dolly would succumb to her injuries that she suffered in her fall. The next day, Reverend W.C. Clemens conducted a beautiful, beautiful funeral service for her, and after which time she was brought here and laid to rest in our family plot. Now, our children, as they grew and embarked on lives of their own, were very successful, I can say, again very proudly. Our son Waller went into banking with the Monticello Bank. Our daughter Nettie moved to Texas and married a very prominent Texas attorney by the name of William Walker. Our daughter Mamie married a local gentleman by the name of William Jones, who was this local school superintendent for several years. Our youngest son, Herschel Tate, he went into the lumber business and was very prosperous doing that. Our daughter Sarah, Sally as she was known more so to those around us, she never married, never had any children, but she put her stamp on the community through her work as an educator. She was also one of the founding members of the Jane Lambton chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution. So those of you who are here today and are members of that, you can thank her for helping get that off the ground. I can also say she kept close to home and took exceptional care of me in my final years. Now, after the tragedy of 1904, I would outlive my wife by some 30 years. But by the time spring would arrive in 1934, I was in a poor shape. Really, I had been since earlier that past winter. But it was on the 3rd day of April, 1934, ironic as it may seem, that this day was a Wednesday, as the day that Dolly had her accident that would ultimately take her life was also a Wednesday. Well, it was late on this particular Wednesday evening that, after clinging to death by a mere thread for several days, a heart attack is what would bring my time here to an end, 92 years after it started over in Cumberland County. I was brought here a few days later after my funeral at the Presbyterian Church, which was led by Reverend Arthur Gross, laid to rest next to Dolly. Several of our children and a few grandchildren have followed us here in the years since. And that's what brings us here today. And it would appear that my time above the sod is coming to an end. The sun is setting. So I want to take this time to thank each and every one of you for coming out to visit this afternoon. Those of us this far down on the hill don't get many visitors these days. We've been here for quite some time. But I welcome you to come back and visit as much as you'd like. Now, just because it's my time to go doesn't mean you have to. I encourage you to take a stroll across the cemetery, and you might just run into one of my neighbors that would love to make your acquaintance just the same. But I hope you've enjoyed this visit as much as I have. I thank you all. Please enjoy the rest of your evening, and may God bless each and every one of you. Thank you very much.